Medical experts had just declared his mother's case hopeless. The billionaire accepted defeat until the maid's daughter made an impossible promise. "Sir, I can make your mother walk again." Robert Harrison had built skyscrapers and negotiated treaties, but he was powerless to stop his mother from fading away in a golden cage. The best doctors from Harvard had just closed their bags, declaring the paralysis caused by the stroke permanent and advising him to simply accept the end. "Make her comfortable," they said. Hope was dead in that freezing library until a 10-year-old girl in cheap sneakers interrupted the silence. She wasn't a specialist, she was the housekeeper's daughter. Yet, she looked the devastated billionaire in the eye and delivered a chilling ultimatum. "Sir, I can make your mother walk again." What do you do when a 10-year-old girl in a hand-me-down dress claims she knows more than your high-priced doctors? Robert Harrison had billions in the bank, but he felt like a pauper standing in his mother's room. The stroke had stolen the woman who raised him, leaving a quiet shell in a wheelchair where a fighter used to sit. The rain hammered against the large glass windows of the estate. It was a cold, gray Tuesday in November. Inside the library, the fire was lit, but the room felt freezing. Robert Harrison, a man who had built skyscrapers and negotiated treaties, looked defeated. He was 55, but today he looked 70. He rubbed his temples, trying to push away the headache that had lived there for 6 months. Across from him sat Margaret. Once, Margaret Harrison had been a force of nature. She ran charities, organized galas, and raised Robert on her own after his father passed. Now she sat slumped in a wheelchair that cost more than most cars. Her hands, usually so expressive, lay still in her lap. Her eyes were open, staring at a painting of a ship on a stormy sea, but she wasn't really seeing it. The stroke had taken her voice and the use of her legs. Dr. Evans, the specialist from the city, had just left. His words were still hanging in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Make her comfortable, Robert," Evans had said, snapping his leather bag shut. At her age, with this level of atrophy, walking isn't a realistic goal. Acceptance is the best medicine now. Acceptance. Robert hated that word. He walked over to the fireplace and leaned his arm against the mantel. He stared into the flames. He felt useless. All his money, all his power, and he was just a son watching his mother fade away in a golden cage. A soft clinking sound came from the hallway. Robert didn't turn around. He knew who it was. It was the cleaning crew. They came on Tuesdays and Fridays. They were like ghosts in the house, quiet, efficient, and mostly invisible. Linda was the head housekeeper. She was a good woman. Hard-working. She kept her head down and did her job. Today, she had her daughter with her. It was a school holiday or maybe a teacher's conference. Robert didn't keep track of those things. The girl's name was Betty. She was 10 years old, with blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a simple blue dress that had been washed many times, and cheap sneakers. She was sitting on a small wooden chair near the library door, waiting for her mother to finish dusting the bookshelves. Betty wasn't playing on a phone, she wasn't fidgeting. She had a thick hardcover book open on her lap. It looked old. The cover was worn leather, scratched and stained. She was reading it with the intensity of a professor. Robert sighed and turned away from the fire. He walked back to his mother. "Mom?" he said softly. Margaret didn't blink. She just kept staring at the ship on the wall. "Did you hear Dr. Evans?" Robert asked, his voice cracking slightly. He thinks we should stop the aggressive therapy. He thinks it's hurting you more than helping." Silence. Robert knelt beside the wheelchair. He took her cold hand in his. "I don't want to give up, Mom, but I don't want to hurt you." He rested his forehead against her hand. For a moment, the great businessman let his guard down. He let the exhaustion show. "Sir?" The voice was small, but it didn't shake. Robert lifted his head. He frowned, looking around. He had forgotten the girl was there. Betty was standing in the doorway of the library. She held the old book against her chest with both arms. Her blue eyes were fixed on Robert, and then they slid to Margaret. Linda, who was on a ladder dusting the top shelf, nearly dropped her feather duster. She scrambled down the ladder, her face pale. "Betty," Linda hissed. "Hush, get back on your chair." Linda turned to Robert, her hands twisting in her apron. "Mr. Harrison, I am so sorry. She knows better. We'll be out of your hair in a minute. Please forgive her." Robert stood up, straightening his suit jacket. He was annoyed. This was a private moment, a painful moment. "It's fine, Linda," Robert said, his voice stiff. "Just take her to the kitchen, please." Linda reached for Betty's arm to pull her away, but Betty didn't move. She planted her feet firmly on the expensive Persian rug. "Sir?" Betty said again. Her voice was louder this time, clearer. "I heard the doctor. He's wrong." Robert froze. His eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Linda looked like she might faint. "Betty, stop it right now, Mr. Harrison. She's just a child. She doesn't mean—" "I do mean it," Betty said. She stepped into the room. She wasn't looking at Linda. She was looking straight at Robert. "I can make your mother walk again." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the rain hitting the glass and the crackle of the fire. Robert stared at the 10-year-old girl. He waited for the punchline. He waited for her to ask for money or to tell a joke, but her face was serious, solemn. She had the expression of an adult who had seen too much, pasted onto the face of a child. "That is not a funny thing to say," Robert said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It is cruel." "I'm not being cruel," Betty replied. She walked closer. She stopped 3 feet from the wheelchair. She looked at Margaret's legs, covered by a wool blanket. "Her muscles are asleep. They aren't dead. The doctor treats the body like a machine, but it's not a machine." "Betty, let's go," Linda pleaded, tears forming in her eyes. She grabbed Betty's shoulder. "Mr. Harrison, please. We're leaving." "Wait," Robert said. He didn't know why he said it. Maybe it was the desperation. Maybe it was the strange confidence in the girl's posture. Or maybe it was the book she was clutching. "Let go of her, Linda," Robert said. Linda hesitated, then released her grip. She stepped back, terrified she was about to be fired. Robert looked down at Betty. "You're 10 years old. You're a child. The man who just left has 3 degrees from Harvard. Why should I listen to a word you say?" Betty lifted the heavy book. She opened it. The pages were yellowed and covered in handwriting. There were drawings of muscles, nerves, and tendons. There were notes in the margins written in faded blue ink. "My grandmother was Alice Miller," Betty said. Robert paused. The name sounded familiar. He searched his memory. "Alice Miller? The army nurse?" "Yes, sir," Betty said. "She served in 3 wars. She ran the rehabilitation unit at the Veterans Hospital in the 70s. She didn't have fancy machines. She had her hands, and she had this book." Robert looked at the book again. He remembered the stories now. Alice Miller was a local legend. They said she could fix a soldier's back with a tennis ball and a bag of hot sand. They said she was tough as nails, but had magic in her fingers. "She passed away last year," Betty said softly. "But she taught me everything before she went. She taught me the protocol." "The protocol?" Robert asked. "It's what she called it," Betty explained. "She said doctors look at the X-rays. She looked at the person. She said the body forgets how to work when it's sad. Your mother looks very sad." Robert felt a lump in his throat. He looked at Margaret. Betty was right. She didn't just look paralyzed. She looked heartbroken. "And you think," Robert started, feeling foolish for even entertaining this, "you think you can do what a specialist couldn't?" "The specialist gave up," Betty said simply. "Grandma Alice never gave up, and she taught me never to give up either." Robert looked at Linda. The maid was shaking her head, silently begging him not to take this seriously. Then he looked at his mother. Margaret hadn't moved a muscle in months. What did he have to lose? His dignity? He had lost that the moment he started begging doctors for miracles that never came. "One time," Robert said. "One session. Right now." Linda gasped. "Mr. Harrison, you can't be serious. If she hurts her—" "I won't hurt her," Betty promised. She set the heavy book down on a side table. "I need a few things, Mom. I need the heating pad from the car. I need 2 hand towels. And I need some olive oil." Linda looked at Robert. He nodded. "Go." Linda ran out of the room. Robert sat down in the leather armchair opposite his mother. He watched Betty. Betty didn't look at him. She walked over to Margaret. She didn't touch her yet. She just stood there, breathing slowly. She closed her eyes for a second, as if she was praying or remembering. When she opened them, she looked at Margaret's face. "Hello, ma'am," Betty said softly. "My name is Betty. I'm going to help you." Margaret didn't respond. Her eyes didn't move from the painting. Betty knelt down. She gently pulled the wool blanket back, exposing Margaret's legs. They were thin, frail. Betty placed her small hands on Margaret's ankles. She didn't massage them. She just held them. She stayed like that for a long time. "What are you doing?" Robert asked, his skepticism returning. "Listening," Betty said without looking up. "Her pulse is weak in the feet. The blood is lazy. It needs a reason to come down here." Linda returned, breathless. She handed Betty the items. Betty took the olive oil. She poured a small amount into her hands and rubbed them together until they were warm. Then, she began. It wasn't a massage like Robert had seen the therapists do. It wasn't about kneading the muscle. Betty used her thumbs to press specific spots near the knee. Then she traced a line down the shin. She moved with a rhythm. Press. Hold. Release. Trace. She hummed a low tune. It was an old song. A marching song? No, a lullaby. Robert watched, mesmerized. The girl's focus was absolute. She wasn't a child anymore. She was a technician at work. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The room was silent except for the rain and Betty's soft humming. Robert was about to call it off. He was about to say, "Okay, that's enough. Thank you for trying." It was clear nothing was happening. It was just a little girl rubbing oil on an old woman's legs. It was sweet, but it was futile. He opened his mouth to speak. "Stop," a raspy sound croaked. Robert jumped. He looked around. Margaret's head had moved. She wasn't looking at the painting anymore. She was looking down. Her chin was tucked against her chest. She was looking at Betty. "Mom?" Robert whispered. "Did you say something?" Margaret's lips were dry. She licked them slowly. She looked at Robert, her eyes sharper than they had been in months. "I said," Margaret whispered, her voice sounding like grinding stones. "Tell the girl. I can feel it." Robert's heart slammed against his ribs. Margaret hadn't spoken a clear sentence in 6 weeks. Betty didn't stop. She didn't even smile. She just kept working her thumbs along the calf muscle. "She feels it," Betty said quietly to Robert. "The nerves are waking up. They are angry because they've been asleep, but they are awake." Robert stood up. His legs felt weak. He walked over and stood directly behind Betty. "What happens next?" he asked. Betty wiped her forehead with her arm. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright. "Now," Betty said, "we have to convince her brain that her feet are still part of her." She looked up at the billionaire. "But I can't do it alone, sir. Grandma Alice said the patient needs a reason to move. You have to give her a reason." Robert looked at his mother. She was watching him, waiting. "What kind of reason?" "A memory," Betty said. "Grandma used to ask the soldiers to think about dancing at their wedding or running to home base." "What did she love to do, sir? Before the chair?" Robert thought. He looked at the garden outside, drenched in rain. "She loved her roses," Robert said. "She used to walk the garden every morning at 6 a.m., pruning the roses." Betty nodded. She placed her hands on the soles of Margaret's feet. "Tell her about the roses," Betty commanded. Tell her exactly how they smell. Tell her about the thorns. Make her feel the grass. Robert felt foolish, but his mother was looking at him. He cleared his throat. Mom, he started. Remember the yellow peace roses? The ones you planted by the south wall? Betty pressed her thumbs into the arch of Margaret's foot. Describe them, Betty whispered. They smell like lemon and honey, Robert said, his voice getting stronger. And the dew is always heavy on them in the morning. Your shoes would get wet. You hated getting your shoes wet. Margaret's eyes fluttered. A tiny, almost invisible twitch happened in her left big toe. Betty saw it. Robert saw it. Again, Betty said, her voice firm. Keep walking her through the garden. For the next hour, the billionaire narrated a walk through a garden while the maid's daughter manipulated the muscles of the woman who used to own the town. When Betty finally sat back, wiping her hands on the towel, Margaret was exhausted. But she wasn't staring at the wall. She was asleep, her breathing deep and rhythmic. Robert looked at Betty. The girl was packing her things. She put the oil away. She folded the towel. She picked up the heavy book. We have to go now, Linda whispered, grabbing Betty's hand. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. We are so sorry for the trouble. Tomorrow, Robert said. Linda froze near the door. Sir? Tomorrow, Robert repeated. He looked at Betty. Can you come back tomorrow? Same time? Betty looked at her mother, then at the billionaire. She nodded once. Yes, sir, but she will be sore. She needs to drink a lot of water tonight. I'll make sure of it, Robert said. He watched them leave. The maid and the little girl with the blonde ponytail. They walked out into the rain. Robert turned back to his mother. For the first time in a long time, the silence in the room didn't feel heavy. It felt like the silence before a sunrise. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. He dialed his assistant. Cancel my meetings for tomorrow afternoon, Robert said. All of them, sir? The assistant asked, surprised. Even the merger discussion? All of them, Robert said. I have an appointment in the library. He hung up. He looked at the spot on the rug where Betty had knelt. He didn't know if it was a miracle or just a fluke. But for the first time in 6 months, his mother had spoken. And for the first time in forever, Robert Harrison felt something dangerous. He felt hope. The library smelled different now. For years, it had smelled of lemon polish and dust. Now, it smelled of camphor, heated rice, and olive oil. 3 weeks had passed since that rainy Tuesday. Every afternoon at 4 o'clock, like clockwork, the heavy oak doors would creak open. Betty would walk in, her backpack slung over one shoulder, the heavy leather book tucked under her arm. Linda would follow, carrying a tray of warm water and fresh towels, her face a mixture of pride and terrifying anxiety. They had a rhythm. Robert was part of it too. The billionaire who used to spend his afternoons shouting at CEOs in Tokyo or London now sat on a velvet ottoman, his suit jacket discarded on a chair, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Hold the ankles, sir, Betty instructed. Robert obeyed. He cupped his mother's heel. It felt fragile, like a bird's bone, but it was warmer than it had been a month ago. She's fighting today, Betty said, her eyes focused on Margaret's calf muscle. The muscles are tight. They're remembering the anger. Robert looked at his mother. Margaret was awake. Her eyes were clear, watching the girl work. She couldn't speak much, just a word here or there, but her face was no longer a mask of stone. It had expressions. Right now, she looked annoyed. Anger? Robert asked. Grandma Alice said the body holds on to things we don't say, Betty explained. She dipped her hands into the warm water, then dried them vigorously to create friction. Soldiers who saw bad things. Their legs would turn to concrete. Not because of a bullet, but because they didn't want to walk back into the fight. Or they didn't want to walk home and face the quiet. She began to work on Margaret's shin, using the heel of her hand in a rolling motion. Your mother is angry she's stuck, Betty said matter-of-factly. So her legs are on strike. We have to negotiate. Robert let out a short, dry laugh. I've negotiated billion-dollar mergers. I never thought I'd be negotiating with a shin bone. It's harder, Betty said. Shin bones don't care about money. She stopped moving and placed her palm flat on Margaret's knee. Tell her about the lake house, Betty whispered. Robert cleared his throat. This was part of the protocol. The mapping. Betty insisted that nerves needed a destination. Mom, Robert said, leaning in. Remember the dock at Lake Louise? The wood was always hot in July. You used to sit on the edge and dip your toes in the water to cool off. The water was so cold it made your teeth ache. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. She remembered. Push for the water, Betty commanded softly. Find the water. Robert watched his mother's foot. It lay limp against the footrest. Come on, Mom, he whispered. Just a dip. Just reach for the water. For a long minute, nothing happened. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly. The wind rattled the window panes. Then, the big toe on her right foot curled. It wasn't a spasm. It was a deliberate, slow curl, like a finger beckoning. I saw it, Robert gasped. She found the water, Betty said, a small smile touching her lips. She didn't celebrate. She didn't cheer. She just nodded, like a mechanic who had successfully tightened a bolt. Good. Now we rest. She covered Margaret's legs with the warm towels. Robert sat back, wiping sweat from his forehead. He felt more exhausted than he did after a board meeting. You're incredible, Betty. Betty shrugged. She opened her book and began writing notes in the margin with a pencil. I'm just following the map. Grandma did the hard work. Tell me about her, Robert said. Alice. Betty looked up. She was small, smaller than me almost, but she could lift a grown man. She smelled like peppermint and rubbing alcohol. She had a scar on her arm from a piece of shrapnel in Korea. She sounds tough. She was, Betty said. But she cried a lot. At night. She thought I was asleep, but I heard her. She said the hardest part of healing people wasn't the blood. It was the giving up. She said most people die long before their hearts stop beating because they just decide to sit down and stay there. Robert looked at his mother. Had she decided to sit down? Had he let her? Grandma said, Betty continued, closing the book, that you have to give them a reason to stand up that is bigger than the reason to sit down. The library door opened. It wasn't Linda. Robert turned, expecting to see a servant with tea. Instead, he saw a man in a charcoal gray suit, carrying a leather medical bag. He was tall, silver-haired, and radiated an air of expensive authority. Dr. Evans. Behind him stood Robert's sister, Clara. Clara lived in New York. She hadn't visited in 6 months. She looked horrified. Robert, Clara said, her voice echoing in the large room. What on earth is going on here? Robert stood up quickly, shielding Betty with his body instinctively. Clara, I didn't know you were coming. Obviously, Clara snapped. She walked into the room, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood. She gestured at the scene. The towels, the bowl of water, the maid's daughter sitting on the floor with a dusty book. I called Dr. Evans because you stopped answering his emails. He told me you canceled the monthly review. Dr. Evans stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses, looking down his nose at Betty. Mr. Harrison, Dr. Evans said, his voice smooth and patronizing. I was concerned. When patients withdraw from standard care, it's usually a sign of distress. I see you found an alternative. He said the word alternative, like it was a dirty word. We're making progress, Robert said firmly. More progress in 3 weeks than you made in 6 months, Doctor. Dr. Evans sighed, a long, weary sigh. Robert, please. I know you're grieving the loss of the woman she used to be. But this? He gestured to Betty. This is a child. And looking at the supplies, warm water and olive oil, this is medieval. She moved her toe, Robert said, on command. Spasms, Dr. Evans dismissed. Involuntary nerve firing. It's common in atrophy cases. It gives families false hope. It's cruel, actually. He looked at Betty. Young lady, you shouldn't be here. You are practicing medicine without a license. Do you know you could get your mother in very serious trouble? Betty stood up. She hugged the book to her chest. She looked tiny next to the doctor, but she didn't back away. I'm not practicing medicine, Betty said quietly. Oh? Dr. Evans raised an eyebrow. Then what do you call this? I'm reminding her she's alive, Betty said. Clara groaned. Oh, for heaven's sake, Robert, this is insanity. You've hired the housekeeper's kid to play witch doctor? Do you know how this looks? If the board finds out you're neglecting mom's medical care for voodoo? It's not voodoo, Robert growled. Her name is Betty. Her grandmother was Alice Miller. Dr. Evans paused. Miller? The army nurse from the VA hospital? You knew her? Robert asked. I knew of her, Evans said stiffly. She was a legend in the county, yes, but she was also known for being unorthodox. And she wasn't a doctor. She was a nurse who didn't know when to accept that a case was closed. She made people walk, Betty said. Her voice was trembling, but she pushed the words out. She made Mr. Henderson walk. He was in a chair for 10 years. She fixed him. Anecdotal evidence, Evans waved a hand. Stories told by country folk. Look, Robert, I'm here to do an assessment. I need to check her vitals and the progression of the muscle decay. Please, clear the room. Robert looked at Betty. She looked terrified now. The authority of the adults, the big words, the threat to her mother, it was weighing on her. Go to the kitchen, Betty, Robert said gently. But sir, Betty whispered, we aren't done. We have to do the cool-down stretches. If we don't, her tendons will snap back like rubber bands. It will hurt her tomorrow. I said go, Clara shouted. Betty flinched. She grabbed her backpack and ran out of the room. Robert felt a surge of anger he hadn't felt in years. He turned to his sister. Don't you ever raise your voice in this house again, Clara. Clara crossed her arms. Someone has to be the adult here. You're losing it, Bobby. Mom is gone. She's been gone since the stroke. You're just playing with a corpse. Get out, Robert said. What? Get out, both of you. Robert, be reasonable, Dr. Evans said, stepping toward the wheelchair. I have a duty of care to Margaret. I cannot leave until I have examined her. If you refuse, I will be forced to document that you are obstructing medical treatment. That could have legal implications for your power of attorney. It was a threat. A polite, legal threat. Robert clenched his jaw. He looked at his mother. Margaret was looking at Dr. Evans. Her eyes were narrowed. Her mouth was working, trying to form shapes. Go ahead, Robert said, defeated. Examine her. He walked to the window and stared out at the gray sky. He felt like a traitor. Behind him, he heard the doctor unpacking his bag, the cold click of metal instruments, the crinkle of sanitary paper. Hello, Margaret. Dr. Evans's voice was loud, the way people speak to the deaf or the simple. I'm just going to move your legs a bit. Tell me if it hurts. Oh, wait, you can't tell me. Well, I'll be gentle. Robert flinched. She can hear you, he thought. She understands everything. Evans muttered. Significant stiffness. The joints are locking up. Clara, look at this. The range of motion is worse than last time. I told you, Clara whispered. He's making it worse. It's not worse. Robert spun around. She was loose before. She was warm. You came in here and froze the room with your negativity, and she locked up. Robert, physiology doesn't respond to vibes, Evans said dryly. He took a reflex hammer and tapped Margaret's knee. Nothing happened. He tapped again. Harder. Nothing. See? Evans said, straightening up. Zero reflex response. The pathways are dead, Robert. The movement you saw was a phantom spasm. It's over. Stop tormenting this child and stop tormenting your mother. Put her back on the palliative care plan. Keep her sedated Keep her comfortable." Margaret made a sound. It was a low, guttural groan. "It's okay, Mom," Clara said, patting her shoulder condescendingly. "We know it's hard." Margaret's hand, the left one, lifted off the armrest. It shook violently. It reached out. Not toward Clara, toward the door where Betty had run. "She wants the girl," Robert said. "She wants water," Evans corrected. "No," Robert said. He walked back to the center of the room. He looked at the famous doctor and his wealthy sister. "You're done. Pack up." "Robert!" "I said pack up," Robert roared. The sound echoed off the mahogany shelves. "You looked at her chart, you looked at her reflexes, but you didn't look at her. You talked about her like she's furniture." He pointed to the door. "Leave, now." Dr. Evans snapped his bag shut. His face was red. "I will be filing a report, Mr. Harrison. This is negligence." "File it," Robert said. Clara grabbed her purse. "You're making a mistake, Bobby. A massive mistake. When she gets hurt, it's on you." They left. The heavy doors slammed shut. The room was quiet again, but the good energy was gone. The smell of camphor was overpowered by the doctor's cologne and the scent of fear. Robert walked over to his mother. She looked exhausted. The light in her eyes had dimmed. She looked small again. "I'm sorry, Mom," Robert whispered. "I'm so sorry." He sat there for a long time, holding her hand. The doubt was creeping in. Was Evans right? Was he just a grieving son clinging to a fairy tale told by a 10-year-old? Was he actually hurting her? The door creaked open. Robert didn't look up. "I said leave me alone. I forgot my book." It was Betty. She crept into the room. Her eyes were red and puffy. She had been crying. She walked over to the side table and picked up the heavy leather journal. She clutched it to her chest. She looked at Robert, then at Margaret. "Is she okay?" Betty asked. "The doctor says she's getting worse," Robert said heavily. "He says the pathways are dead." Betty looked at Margaret's legs, then she looked at Robert with a fierceness that startled him. "Doctors look for roads," Betty said. "Grandma said when the road is blown up, you have to build a bridge. We aren't done building the bridge yet." "They're going to try to stop us, Betty," Robert said. "They have lawyers. They have courts." "Do you have lawyers?" Betty asked. Robert blinked. A slow smile spread across his face. "Yes. Yes, I have lawyers. I have an army of them." "Good," Betty said. She put the book back down on the table. She didn't leave. She rolled up her sleeves. "Because we didn't do the cool down, and if we don't do it, she will hurt tomorrow." She walked over to the wheelchair. She didn't ask for permission this time. She placed her hands on Margaret's ankles. "I'm sorry about the bad man," Betty told Margaret softly. "He's gone now. It's just us. Let's finish." Robert watched them. The doubt didn't vanish completely, but it retreated into the shadows. He realized then that the conflict wasn't just about medicine, it was about control. Dr. Evans wanted to control the decline. Betty wanted to unleash the fight. Robert took his jacket off again. He loosened his tie. He sat back down on the ottoman. "What do I do?" Robert asked. "Hold her hand," Betty said, "and tell her about the roses again. The bad man made her forget the smell." November turned into December. The rain turned into snow. The estate, usually quiet, was now filled with a strange energy. It wasn't a happy energy yet. It was the energy of a fight. The library had changed. The Persian rugs were rolled up in the corner. In their place were two heavy wooden dining chairs placed back to back. They looked out of place among the leather books and oil paintings. They looked like tools. Betty looked tired. She was 10 years old, but she had dark circles under her eyes. Every day after school, she came to the house. She worked on Margaret's legs for 2 hours. Then she did her homework at the kitchen table, while her mother, Linda, finished cleaning. One Thursday, Robert walked in and found Betty sitting on the floor, rubbing her own wrists. "Are you okay?" Robert asked. Betty jumped up. "Yes, sir, I'm fine." "Your hands hurt," Robert observed. "Grandma Alice said the healer takes a little bit of the pain," Betty said, hiding her hands behind her back. "It's just a transfer. It goes away." Robert felt a pang of guilt. He was a billionaire. He could buy hospitals. Yet here was a child, wearing second-hand sneakers, absorbing his family's pain. "We can take a break today," Robert said. "No," Betty said firmly. "Muscles have short memories. If we skip a day, they forget a week." She turned to Margaret. "Ready, ma'am?" Margaret nodded. She looked different now. She wasn't just a passenger in her own body anymore. She was a participant. She had gained weight, her color was better, but she still hadn't stood up. Today was the day they were going to try. Betty positioned the wheelchair between the two heavy wooden chairs. "Okay," Betty said. She sounded like a drill sergeant. "We practiced the lean. Now we do the lift." Linda was standing by the door, biting her nails. "Betty, please be careful. If she falls—" "She won't fall," Betty said. "Mr. Harrison is the spotter." Robert stepped behind the wheelchair. He put his hands on his mother's waist. He could feel her trembling. "Mom," Robert whispered, "you don't have to do this if you're scared." Margaret turned her head. She looked at her son. Her voice was stronger now, though still raspy. "I am scared," she said. "But I am tired of sitting." Betty stood in front of Margaret. She placed her hands on Margaret's knees. "On 3, Betty said. "Push down on the chairs. Head up. Look at me. Don't look at your feet. Your feet know what to do." 1. The room went silent. 2. Robert tightened his grip on his mother's waist. 3. Up! Margaret grunted. She slammed her hands down on the wooden chairs. Her arms shook violently. She heaved her body forward. Her bottom lifted off the cushion, an inch, 2 inches. "Push!" Betty yelled. "Push the floor away!" Margaret's face turned red. Her veins bulged in her neck. She groaned, a sound of pure effort. Her legs straightened slightly. She was doing it. She was bearing weight. Then, her left knee buckled. Robert shouted. He caught her, pulling her back into the safety of the wheelchair. Margaret slumped back, gasping for air. Her head lolled to the side. Her eyes rolled back slightly. "Mom!" Robert yelled. He grabbed her wrist. Her pulse was racing like a hummingbird. "She's fainting! Linda, get water! Get the phone!" Panic exploded in the room. Linda ran for the kitchen. Robert fumbled for his cell phone, his fingers shaking. The doubt came rushing back, cold and sharp. Evans was right. I'm killing her. I'm pushing an old woman to death. "Stop!" a voice commanded. It wasn't Linda. It was Betty. She climbed onto the footrests of the wheelchair. She put her small hands on Margaret's cheeks. She forced Margaret to look at her. "Breathe, ma'am," Betty said calmly. "In through the nose, out through the mouth. Look at me. You're just dizzy. It's the blood rushing down. It's gravity. Don't be afraid of gravity." Robert held the phone, his thumb hovering over the emergency button. He watched. Betty stared into Margaret's eyes. She breathed loudly, forcing Margaret to match her rhythm. Slowly, the color returned to Margaret's face. Her eyes focused. The panic receded. "She's okay," Betty said, stepping down. She looked at Robert. "Put the phone away, sir. If you call the ambulance, they will take her, and they won't bring her back." Robert lowered the phone. He felt lightheaded himself. "She almost collapsed, Betty." "She's an athlete now," Betty said. "Athletes get dizzy. Athletes fall. Grandma Alice said if you aren't falling, you aren't trying hard enough." Robert looked at his mother. Margaret was wiping sweat from her forehead with a trembling hand. "Mom?" Robert asked. "Are we done?" Margaret looked at the 2 wooden chairs. She looked at her legs. She looked at the maid's daughter. "No," Margaret whispered. Robert froze. "No?" he asked. "Again," Margaret said. "Mom, you can't—" "Again," Margaret barked. It was the old Margaret, the Margaret who ran boardrooms, the Margaret who didn't take no for an answer. Betty smiled. It was the first time Robert had seen her smile all day. "Okay," Betty said. Deep breath, reset, mind over muscle. They set up again. Robert took his position. He was terrified, but his mother's courage shamed him into silence. 1, 2, 3. Margaret pushed. Robert lifted. Betty shouted encouragement at the knees. Margaret rose. She cleared the seat. She locked her elbows. And then, for the first time in 6 months, Margaret Harrison stood. She wasn't walking. She was leaning heavily on the chairs, her knuckles white. Her legs were trembling like leaves in a storm. But she was vertical. "Hold it," Betty whispered. 10 seconds. Count with me. 1, Robert choked out. Tears streamed down his face. He couldn't wipe them away because he was holding her. 2, Linda whispered from the doorway, her hands covering her mouth. 3, 4, 5. Margaret looked up. She looked at the painting of the ship on the wall. She was seeing it from eye level, not from below, from eye level. 6, 7. "I'm standing," Margaret gasped. 8, 9. "Down," Betty commanded. "Slowly. Control the descent." They lowered her back into the chair. Margaret let out a long breath. She closed her eyes. A single tear tracked through the sweat on her cheek. "I stood," she whispered. "You stood," Robert said, kissing the top of her head. "You did it." Betty sat down hard on the floor. She wiped her forehead with her sleeve. She looked exhausted, but triumphant. "Next week," Betty said, panting, "we take a step." News travels fast in a small town, but it travels faster in the world of high society. A week before Christmas, a thick cream-colored envelope arrived. It wasn't for Robert. It was for Margaret. Robert opened it in the kitchen. Betty was there, eating a peanut butter sandwich that Linda had made her. They were taking a break before the afternoon session. "What is it?" Betty asked. Robert read the card. His jaw tightened. "It's the foundation gala," Robert said. "My father started it. It's the biggest night of the year for the company. Investors, press, the board." He tossed the card on the table. "Clara sent it. She's organizing it this year." He picked up the handwritten note attached to the back. Robert. "The rumors are getting out of hand. Stockholders are saying Mom is incapacitated, or worse, she needs to make an appearance. I've arranged a private booth. She can stay in the chair, wave, smile, and we can leave. If she doesn't show, the board is going to call for a vote of no confidence in your leadership as her proxy. Don't be stubborn. Clara." "They want her to be a prop," Robert said bitterly. "They want to wheel her out, show she's alive, and wheel her back." "When is it?" Betty asked. "Christmas Eve," Robert said. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Betty repeated. She looked at her sandwich. She took a bite, thinking. "We can't go," Robert said. "She's not ready for a crowd, and I won't let them parade her around in that chair like an invalid. It would break her spirit." "She shouldn't go in the chair," Betty said. Robert looked at her. "Betty, she stood for 10 seconds yesterday. She can't walk into a ballroom." "She can't walk far," Betty corrected. "But she doesn't have to walk far. How far is the door to the stage?" "Maybe 20 feet, Robert said. 20 feet, Betty calculated. That's roughly 10 steps, maybe 12 if she takes small ones. "Betty, no, it's too risky. If she falls in front of everyone?" "She won't fall," Betty said. She put her sandwich down. Grandma Alice prepared a soldier for a medal ceremony once. He had no knees. She braced him up. He walked across the stage, saluted, and walked off. He collapsed backstage, but nobody saw that. They only saw him walk. "Why does it matter?" Robert asked. "Why push it?" Betty looked him in the eye. "Because she's proud, sir. You told me that. She's a proud woman. If she goes in the chair, she feels small. If she walks, even just a little, she wins. And you win. And the bad doctor loses." Robert looked at the invitation. He imagined the scene. Dr. Evans smugly standing by. Clara managing the invalid, the pity in the eyes of his competitors. Then he imagined his mother, the fire that had returned to her eyes. He walked out of the kitchen and into the library. Margaret was reading a magazine. She was holding it herself. "Mom," Robert said, "Clara wants you at the gala." Margaret stiffened. She lowered the magazine. "No," she said clearly. "No chair, not in public." "What if you didn't use the chair?" Robert asked. Margaret looked at him. "Robert, Betty thinks you can do 20 feet, Robert said. "She thinks we can train for just that walk, just enough to get to the podium." Margaret looked at her legs. She looked at the walker they had started using yesterday. "Just for standing 20 feet?" she asked. "It will be the hardest thing you've ever done," Robert said. "It will hurt. You might fail." Margaret set her jaw. The steel was back. "Call Clara," Margaret said. "Tell her I'm coming, and tell her to save me a dance." The next 14 days were hell. There was no other word for it. The library became a boot camp. Betty was relentless. She stopped being the sweet girl with the book and became a taskmaster. "Lift again. Look up. If you look at your feet, you fall. Look at the horizon," Margaret cried. She screamed in frustration. She threw a towel at Robert once, but she never quit. Betty was there every step. She measured the distance. She marked 20 feet on the library rug with masking tape. "This is the stage," Betty said. "You start here. The podium is here. Robert is on your left. A cane in your right hand, not a walker. Walkers look sick. A cane looks elegant." They practiced until Margaret's legs shook so bad she couldn't stand. Then they iced them. Then they did it again. 3 days before the gala, disaster struck. Margaret woke up with a swollen ankle. It wasn't a fracture, but it was angry. "It's inflammation," Betty said, looking at the red puffiness. "We pushed too hard." "That's it," Robert said, burying his face in his hands. "It's over. We can't do it." "We can," Betty said. She opened her grandmother's book. "We just have to change the tactic. No more walking practice, only rest. Ice, elevation, and compression. We save every ounce of energy for the night." "She won't have the strength," Robert argued. "She has the strength," Betty said. "Muscles don't forget in 3 days. She needs to believe she can do it. That's the fuel now." Betty turned to Margaret. "Ma'am, you are going to rest for 3 days. You will visualize the walk, every step, in your mind. Can you do that?" Margaret nodded. She looked at her swollen ankle, then at her son. "Get my dress ready," Margaret said. Christmas Eve brought a biting wind, but inside the Grand Hotel's crystal ballroom, the air was warm and heavy with expensive perfume. The room hummed with the low murmur of the city's elite, bankers, politicians, and old money families. Clara stood near the entrance, her red silk dress betraying her anxiety as she constantly checked the door. Dr. Evans stood beside her, nursing a glass of champagne with the relaxed air of a man who had already won. "She won't come," Evans said smoothly. "Robert is stubborn, but he isn't cruel. He won't subject her to this." "He promised," Clara whispered, wringing her hands. "If they arrive," Evans countered, "she will be in the chair. And you, Clara, must be ready to explain to the board why the family matriarch is invalid." At that moment, the heavy double doors swung open. The chatter didn't stop all at once. It died in waves, a hush spreading from the entrance until the silence was absolute. Robert Harrison stood in the doorway, tuxedo sharp, jaw set like granite. Beside him was not a wheelchair. Beside him stood Margaret. She wore midnight blue velvet that fell to the floor. On her feet were sturdy, flat shoes. In her right hand, she gripped a silver-headed cane with white-knuckled ferocity. Her left arm was locked through Robert's elbow. "Oh my God!" Clara gasped. Dr. Evans's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble. He didn't notice. He stared, mouth slightly open at the impossibility before him. "Ready, Mom?" Robert whispered. He felt her vibrating against him, a violin string pulled to the snapping point. "Ready," Margaret breathed. They took the first step. It wasn't graceful. It was a brawl against gravity. Margaret threw her right hip forward, planting the cane with a sharp clack, then dragged her left leg. It caught on the plush carpet. She stumbled. The crowd inhaled sharply. "I've got you," Robert murmured, tightening his grip. "Find the rhythm." "Don't look at your feet," Betty's voice echoed in Margaret's mind. "Look at the horizon." Margaret lifted her chin. She fixed her eyes on the podium. 20 feet. It looked like 20 miles. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The pain in her ankles was a hot needle, but the silence of the room spurred her on. They were witnessing a resurrection. Halfway there, her left knee began to shake. "The sewing machine leg," Betty called it, nerves misfiring. "Robert," she gasped. I can't." She swayed. Robert saw the panic rising in her eyes. "Look at Evans," Robert whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare let him be right." Margaret turned her head. She saw the doctor. He looked terrified. He wasn't looking at a patient. He was looking at a miracle that proved him obsolete. Then, she looked past him to the shadows of the hallway. Betty was there. The girl raised a small fist in the air. Margaret gritted her teeth, a low growl built in her throat. She lifted the cane and slammed it down. She took another step, then another. The rhythm returned. When they reached the podium, Robert helped her up the single step. She grabbed the wood like a life raft, swaying but vertical. She leaned into the microphone. "Good evening," Margaret said. Her voice was raspy, but it was iron. The room exploded. It wasn't just applause. It was a roar. Clara was sobbing openly. Dr. Evans had disappeared into the crowd. Margaret didn't give a speech. She didn't have the breath. She just smiled, a tired, triumphant warrior's smile, and nodded. Robert looked at his mother, then back at the door. Betty was gone. They didn't stay for dinner. The effort had drained Margaret completely. By the time they got back to the estate, she was asleep. Robert carried her to bed, took off her shoes, and covered her. He walked downstairs to the kitchen. Linda and Betty were waiting. Betty sat at the table with a cup of cocoa. She looked small again, just a child. Robert sat across from her. "She did it," he said. "She walked the whole way." "I knew she would," Betty said, blowing on her cocoa. Dr. Evans looked like he had seen a ghost. "He did," Betty said softly. "He saw the woman he gave up on." Robert reached into his pocket. He pulled out his checkbook and a gold pen. He placed them on the table. "Betty," Robert said, "I want to give you something. Name the price I can pay for your college. I can fund a hospital wing in your grandmother's name." Linda turned from the sink, her eyes wide. Betty looked at the checkbook. She didn't touch it. "I don't want money," Betty said. "Betty, be reasonable," Robert urged. "You did the impossible. You deserve a reward." "I didn't do it for a reward," Betty said, "and I didn't do it alone. Grandma Alice helped." She reached into her backpack and pulled out the battered leather book. She slid it to Robert. "Read the last page." Robert opened it. The handwriting was shaky. March 12th. "I worry about the Harrison boy. Robert. I saw him in the paper today. His father, old Mr. Harrison, was the only one who visited me when I came back from Vietnam. He didn't care that I was just a nurse. He brought me flowers. He told me, 'Alice, if you ever see my family in trouble, you help them. Promise me.' I promised. Betty, if you are reading this, keep the promise." Robert stared at the page. His father, the ruthless businessman, had visited the VA hospital. He had never known. "She told me that story," Betty said. "She said your dad was the only one who treated her like a hero, so I had to come. It wasn't a job. It was a promise." Robert closed the book. He wept. He wept for his mother's pain, his father's secret kindness, and the honor of this little girl. He put the checkbook away. He wiped his eyes and looked at Linda, then Betty. "I can't pay you for a promise," Robert said, his voice steadying. "But a soldier needs a base of operations, and a soldier needs a future." He reached into his jacket pocket again. This time, he didn't pull out a check. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. He slid it across the table. "What is this?" Linda asked, trembling. "It's the deed to the cottage on the edge of the estate," Robert said. "The one with the big garden. It's yours, fully paid for. Taxes covered for life." Linda gasped, covering her mouth. "And," Robert continued, looking at Betty, "inside is a trust document. It's an educational grant. Medical school, nursing school, whatever you want. It's already in your name. You can't return it." Betty frowned. "But sir—" "Grandma Alice made a promise to my father," Robert interrupted gently. "Now I'm making a promise to you. You saved my mother. I will not let you worry about rent or tuition ever again. Consider it logistical support." Betty looked at her mother. Linda was crying happy tears. Betty looked at the envelope. She touched it lightly. "Grandma always wanted a garden," she whispered. "Now she has one," Robert said 6 months later. The yellow peace roses were exploding with color. The air smelled of lemon and honey. Margaret Harrison was in the garden. She wasn't running, but she was walking. She used the silver cane, moving slowly along the path, pruning the bushes. She looked happy. Robert sat on the terrace, watching her. Beside him sat Betty. She was wearing a new school uniform. Her backpack was new too. "She's moving well today," Betty critiqued. "Her left heel is dragging a little." "Give her a break, coach, it's Sunday," Robert laughed. "Pain doesn't take Sundays off," Betty said automatically. Robert smiled. Dr. Evans had retired quietly. The story of the gala had spread. People didn't want the doctor who gave up anymore. They wanted the doctor who believed. Linda walked out onto the terrace. She wasn't wearing a maid's uniform. She wore a sharp blazer and held a tablet. Robert had made her the manager of the estate. She ran the house now. She didn't clean it. "The car is ready, Betty," Linda said, smiling. "You don't want to be late for the science fair." Betty stood up. She shouldered her backpack. "I have to go," she said. "I'm presenting on the nervous system." "Do you need help with your speech?" Robert asked. "No," Betty said. "I know what I'm talking about." She started to walk away. "Betty," Robert called out. She turned. The sun caught her blonde hair. "Thank you," Robert said. Betty nodded, a sharp, concise nod. "Keep her moving, sir. If you stop, you rust." She walked toward the car where her mother was waiting. Robert watched them go. He looked back at his mother, standing tall among the roses. He realized then that the world was full of experts with fancy degrees who knew exactly why things couldn't be done. But sometimes, when the night is darkest, you don't need an expert. You don't need $1 billion. You just need a kid with a dusty book, a pair of strong hands, and a promise she refused to break. Robert stood up and walked down the steps into the garden. "Mom," he called out, "let me help you with those roses." She turned and smiled. She didn't need his help, but she took his arm anyway. They walked together, one step at a time. And that is where we leave Robert and Margaret, walking among the roses, showing that experts don't always hold the keys to the impossible. Whenever I share a story like this, my goal is to offer you a moment of hope, a reminder that sometimes the biggest miracles come from the smallest places. I'd love to know, what were you doing while listening? Maybe you're taking a walk to keep from rusting, or perhaps you're resting after your own long battle. Let me know in the comments. I truly enjoy reading them all. If this story moved you, hitting like and subscribing helps us immensely. We are constantly refining our storytelling, so please leave your honest feedback below. Thank you for walking this path with me today.